right, the conversation begins now on Daybreak. You're calling it State of the Nation, but we're going to talk about so many things, yeah, because it's 32 days, the polls, and a lot of things are happening. We are also aware that the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission will be holding a press briefing at 12 p.m. As soon as that happens, we'll take you there to hear whether they'll respond to most of the issues coming their way. This is right after the court ruling that erred in demanding that independent presidential candidates provide copies of identity cards. We'll talk about that in just a bit, but let's start off with the dailies and then get into that. Let me introduce my guest real quick. Joshua Kipto, Nandi County Assembly Speaker, is joining us online, and also Murigi Kamande, Advocate of the High Court, is here with us in studio. Thank you so much for making time for us, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We'll start off with the standard. Raila's threat to boycott polls on rigging claims. Azimio leader alleges plot to use electronic voting system to sneak in 200 ballot papers in each of the 10,000 polling stations as he demands a manual register. Kipto, what are your views on this, first of all? Is there a point in demanding both the manual and electronic register?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Trevor, my thinking is, I think last time we spoke about preparation about elections, each of the presidential candidates were given a chance to nominate a liaison officer so that issues, whatever they were, they would raise. I would want to refer back to the demands made by the former Prime Minister, that is Azimio candidate. And I'm a bit curious to realize that at that time there was not so much insistence. They actually said they are very confident about IEBC's ability to conduct a credible poll. I don't know what has changed at this point. Number two, I think the 22 elections will not be about chest stamping and about threats. I would rather whereby now that each of the presidential team have a direct line with the IEBC through their liaison officers, it is a matter that can easily be put across and agreed, rather than a case whereby you raise an issue in a very public way, in a way that you'd say boycott, because boycott is a very powerful term. I don't think IEBC has refused. The issue would be, where is the place of the manual register? Why had we accepted the electronic means, and then at this point we say we also need manual? They have a point. We have to listen to them, because this election is for everyone, and what gives it confidence is where the IEBC is open and transparent, and importantly is able to give room to both parties to be able to give their point. So my thinking would be, it would only be fair for the Azimio team to have a sit down with IEBC, but together with all the other teams, including even Professor Jakoya and K.kwanza, and if there's an issue, put on the table, rather than whereby we operate on threats. Because if K.kwanza responds in kind and say even themselves they are not going to participate in an election if we introduce manual, so it's a zero-sum game. So I think the path that was taken as at the time they were presenting papers would make sense, where you can make your point, but at the same time let it be inclusive.
But Kipto, are you concerned that there's no record when it comes to electronic? If we only deal with electronic voter register, there'd be no record of some sorts. I mean, you can't really tell. That's their argument.
Now, with abundance of caution, I look at the 2013 election and 2017 election, especially 2013, when for the first time we introduced electronic voting or use of BVR kits. And I remember in 2013, most of them failed. They had to revert to manual. In 2017, there was that small problem except for a backup. And as at the time, we went to the Supreme Court under the presidential petition, one of the grounds for the nullification of the election was that issue about BVR kits and KIMS kit. So this time, I would want to be a bit pragmatic and say, now that IEBC has given its confidence and assurance that the electronic system works, I would not be strongly opposed to the idea that having a backup, but I would prefer that it be an agreed position between all the parties. Okay. It is good for IEBC at this point to call the presidential teams or the stakeholders and actually iron this thing out as soon as today or latest Monday, so that a clear position can be given. Okay. If it is a question of a manual register, let it be a case of a backup for the electronic register that Kenyans have already been made to believe works.
Okay.
We cannot change rules midstream. Okay. If it's a question of a backup, it makes sense. But all parties and stakeholders be on the table, let it be agreed, the matter will be settled at that point.
Okay. Muringi, is this a reasonable demand to have both electronic and manual?
It is a reasonable demand, and it is not just a demand from nowhere. Yeah. It is a requirement of the law. If you look at Section 44A of the Elections Act, Regulation 69(1) of the Elections General Regulations, it is a requirement that IEBC must provide a complementary mechanism for identification of voters. And nobody can tell us that a complementary mechanism for KIMS kit is another KIMS kit. Just telling us that we have 3 backup KIMS kit, that is a complementary mechanism. It is not a complementary mechanism. And what we believe in is, way back from 2017, IEBC had taken a position. It was out of these regulations that they made. They issued a memo in 2017 detailing how the manner in which identification of voters would be carried out, all the way to identification of those voters using the manual register. And they defended their position in court, saying that they had established a complementary mechanism that was the manual identification of voters using that manual register. Coming closer home, 2-3 weeks ago, a contract was awarded for the printing of ballot papers. It included, and it is so clear, it included the printing of the register. So where will that register that is supposed to be printed go? It is supposed to be at each and every polling station. So what we are saying, it is a reasonable demand. Let us have, and nobody is saying that we do away with the electronic register, but let us have the electronic register alongside the manual register. It is very simple.
Yeah.
It is a practice that has been there.
But Muringi, would this be a ground for challenging the presidential election?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And if you look at in 2017, election is a process. An election being a process, it goes way back to the preparations of that election, to the day of the voting, and to the activities after that voting. And therefore, if there is any contravention, I remember there was a contention on the qualitative and the quantitative. It's not just about the numbers. It's also about the quality of the election. So if we have not complied with any of the express provisions, and I've said this, the IEBC must comply with Section 44A of the Elections Act. It also must comply with the Regulation 69(1) of the election regulations. So that would be a ground enough for purposes of the election being cancelled.
Yeah.
Yes.
But let me bring in Kipto on this. Kipto, there are 2 allegations towards your side of the divide. Azimio leader alleges a plot to use electronic voting system to sneak in 200 ballot papers in each of the 10,000 polling stations, as he also demands a manual register. Have you heard in your circles any conversation around ballot stuffing, so to speak?
Thank you very much, Trevor. I think we've been here quite some time and seen how elections are done. It is a bit of wild allegation to say that K.kwanza can be able to rig. We are talking about a campaign whereby Azimio is fully funded and fully backed by the government, together with every single support a team can require from government. Since when can the team that is more or less in the opposition consider to be the one to rig? What machinery does K.kwanza have? What control does K.kwanza have over the electoral process? If you look at the complaints K.kwanza has raised before, in fact, it has been a case of the government being completely biased in support of Azimio, and it is a bit prosperous, and it doesn't make sense to say that K.kwanza can be able to have this. I would want to treat that as just a case of politics. You know, podium politics is about throwing any allegation, and it is basically for the public gallery, but nothing serious to even think much about it. Because at the moment, if you look at K.kwanza, after the launch of manifesto last week, the time is now selling the manifesto and going flat out to the people. If indeed K.kwanza was about stealing elections, why are we campaigning furiously? Look at the number of meetings K.kwanza has done compared to Azimio. We are literally dwarfing them 2-to-1. If you see a region like Mount Kenya, for example, where we've done countless meetings trying to win over people and selling an agenda, I don't think that is a team that is preparing to steal. That is a team that knows that this election is about economy, selling the agenda. Number 2, I would want to to register a disappointment, because as at the time the two coalition presidential candidates were presenting papers, Honorable Raila Odinga spoke very well and said they have confidence in IEBC, and even said this election they will respect their opponents, and in this election it will be about issues. So what has changed midway? Is it a sense of panic that K.kwanza is holding its ground and being now more or less like the front runner in this election? So I would just register it as a sense of panic from the Azimio team, after themselves going around and seeing the impact K.kwanza has had when it comes to the issue of 22 elections on matters economy, and the agenda being bottom-up economic model selling more than their unity message they are selling within Azimio. So I don't think it is true. There's no possible way a party can sit and say that they are planning to steal a polling station. It is impossible. Does it mean then that K.kwanza has ability to staff 200 ballot papers, for example, in a polling station in Bondo, where Raila comes from? I don't think it is possible. I remember Mwai Kibaki in 1988, after Mlolongo elections, he said even rigging requires some brains. And I don't think we can get to that level where we say K.kwanza coalition is sitting and planning to rig. For us, it's a question of selling an agenda and believing and trusting the process. I'm happy my senior commander has said election is a process. It didn't begin today. It began with campaign. It began with selling an agenda. And that's why both of the teams are furiously selling their agenda. Let Azimio stick to their unity agenda. The K.kwanza team will stick to the economic agenda that every single Kenyan, as at the moment, the trouble and the struggle they are going through, will be able to listen and cast their lot with the K.kwanza team. All right.
Is there a valid concern in these rigging claims, or is this just politics from where you stand?
I wouldn't just say it's just politics. Yeah. And there's a Kiswahili saying, bio mgambo ikilia kuna jambo. There's all, where there's smoke, there's some sort of fire. And I want to bring my colleague Kipto, my friend Kipto, to Kriegler report on 2007-2008 about the widespread allegations of ballot stuffing and rigging. And what the Kriegler report observed is that there was rigging on both sides. And rigging on both sides, what meant is that every side, be it Kibaki side, be it Raila side, used their strongholds as the focal points for ballot stuffing. And why are those strongholds easy targets for ballot stuffing? One is it's very easy to intimidate agents of the other divide. For example, you do not expect that Ruto's agents will be that strong in a place like in Kisumu or in Siaya or within Siaya. It is not expected that within Rift Valley that we'll have a very strong presence of Azimio agents. It's very easy to intimidate them and get them out of those polling stations. The same way with observers. So basically what you have in those areas, it is very easy for the IEBC officials to collude with the political parties and the locals simply because all of them are aligned. Yeah. So it becomes very easy. Say those 10,000 polling stations are very few, and you're talking about 200, a number of 200, which can easily be done. So you cannot just dismiss these as mere politics. These are real things that should worry us. And the last thing we should have is a situation where people no longer have faith in IEBC. We do not want to slide back to, say, 2007 or even in 2017. There's also something else that Kipto observed about when Honorable Raila said that he had confidence in IEBC. That is true. But hardly 4 days later, we heard that there were allegations of mass transfer of voters that was assisted by IEBC officials. Having faith in IEBC does not mean giving them leeway to perpetuate illegalities. It was only a few days later that IEBC chairman, Wafula Chebukati, said that they do not have a single manual register at the polling stations. What does that? What was that meant to mean? That he's willing to contravene the law regardless of the outcome. So having faith in the IEBC does not mean that you're going to let everything slide that every IEBC says and says. That is impossible.
Kipto, what does K.kwanza believe? Do they have confidence in the IEBC?
So far, so good. If you remember when we were presenting our papers, we had our issues. We raised our issues and we felt they were addressed. I want to remind my senior commander about the issue of the mass transfer. In fact, it was K.kwanza that raised the red flag. It was not Azimio. We raised the red flag, and true to the word, we were proven right. Number two, we are not dismissing issues raised. Each of the party has a right. Each of the two major coalitions, including even the fringe candidates, they have a right to raise issues against IEBC. That's why you remember the group of Ekuru. Our court went to court and they have their orders, and everyone has a right to be listened. But let us maintain decency. Let us maintain some truthfulness that gives the process some confidence. He's referring to 2007. How about 2013 and 2017? I don't remember a case for 13-17 where there was ballot stuffing. In fact, nullification of the presidential election of 2017 was more on the process but not on the rudimentary form of rigging, where you talk about ballot stuffing, where you talk about agents being intimidated. That has not happened in the last two elections, meaning on that front we can speak confidently that both coalitions will be represented adequately with their respective agents, unless Azimio are not confident about their agents. For example, I vote in a polling station in Chemurusoi primary. I don't think any single Azimio agent will be intimidated. And remember, it is not just the presidential election. We also have MCA, governor, MP seats for different parties. And that would mean each of the parties will be represented in the polling station. So I don't think it is possible, for example, for ballot stuffing or for intimidation to happen at this time of our country's election. Having run successfully two elections without such incidences of ballot stuffing, maybe the main issue should be the technical issue about having having the KIMS kit, but at the same time, they can make a point that we need a complementary mechanism of manual register. As K.kwanza, there is no opposition per se to that, but we've said, let us maintain decency and let us have honesty as we approach this issue. Nothing stops the IEBC answering the issue, and I've given a very simple proposal. Why don't we call stakeholders to the table and agree, so that as we move on, what makes the difference is communication. And I'm happy that these issues are being raised early at this stage, so that the last 2 weeks we will not be running helter-skelter and doing fear-mongering at the expense of giving Kenyans an ample time to dissect the two coalitions or the 3-4 presidential candidates who presented themselves and say who represents the future, who represents solution to the current problems we are facing as a country. You can't imagine that as a country we are one step away from going the Sri Lanka way, economically speaking, because of shortage of dollars as well as high cost of living that a basic average Kenyan cannot be able to afford. So my proposition is, all these issues can be raised, all these issues can be addressed. And I have always advised and say IEBC can do much better on matters communication. Now that Azimio has raised this issue, as soon as today, let IEBC respond and say that they are responding and should be in writing. The media should be copied so that these issues are dealt with publicly. The way the issue of voter transfer was done, IEBC stepped up. It actually, the chairman went on record and said they have already done their audit. They released the audit findings. They said they were able to stack out 500,000. The same was given to all the parties to be aware of. The matter was settled. So even on this issue about manual register as a backup, the same can be addressed, and it should be done swiftly so that we don't have side shows. We focus on selling the agenda and pick the right person to lead this country in the next 1 month.
Okay, keep your views coming at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. We're still continuing with this conversation. We are aware that the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission will give a press briefing at midday today so that we know what's really going on there. They're still facing another issue here, Murigi, in terms of the presidential campaigns. Yes. Now the court has said that they are, when it comes to demanding that they have IDs, copies. What does this mean now? Are they going to increase the number of presidential candidates? Because that has been the back and forth that everybody is trying to figure out. Is the list going to be longer from the 4 who have been cleared by now, or what happens there?
Two things. Yesterday I was in court, and just a day after that, a judgment was delivered on the requirement. What the court said is that regulation, was it 8? Yes, regulation 8 that required the copies of ID cards do accompany the supporters or the signatures of the supporters was unconstitutional and was in breach of the Data Protection Act. But what the court did not do is that aside is that there are also other petitions pending. One by Akura Court and the other one by, was it Kigame, before the High Court, where now they are relying on this decision for purposes of overturning the decision of the IEBC, of the IEBC DRC, and also of the IEBC itself to bar them. So as it stands right now, they are not automatically back on the ballot. IEBC has to make a decision. For example, their petitions have to be heard. I know there's a petition that is pending specifically for the Kuro Court that was transferred to another court. So as it stands, we only have these 4 presidential candidates, and unless there is an order, a strict order to IEBC to go back and review their decisions on the basis of those directions, it still remains that those people are still bad.
Yeah, but there are people they barred on the fact that they didn't give the copies of the IDs. So now if that is not a requirement anymore.
Yes, a decision has already been made by IEBC.
Yeah.
Yes, and for IEBC to reach at a different verdict, there must be a review of that decision. And the question now that arises is, since there are pending matters before the High Court challenging the decision of the IEBC to bar a Kuro Court, say Mwangi wa Iria, say Kigame, for failure to have a sufficient number of IDs, it is not automatic.
Yeah.
That's what we are saying. That IEBC cannot even act on its own motion because the decision that has already been made, it has been affirmed by the Dispute Resolution Committee, and their petitions are pending before the High Court. So one of the prayers that I thought they would be praying, and I know they did, that there is a pending application for purposes of verifying that indeed they had the required number of signatures, but what they lacked was the number of copies of the IDs. Yeah. So in the absence of a specific order requiring IEBC to review that decision stands, in my opinion.
Okay, Kipto, what is your interpretation before I take a quick break?
Now, my interpretation is that I think it's only a question of time, inconvenience, because IEBC had made its decision and had stuck to the requirements they sought from the respective candidates on matter signature. But with the court giving directions on the same, I would agree with my senior that we would have to await specific order compelling IEBC whether to clear these particular candidates. My only concern is a question of timing. How does it affect the preparation for ballot papers and what have you? Previously, I also saw how IEBC dealt with the issue of Sakaja. By the time the COE came with a letter saying they are revoking recognition of his degree, IEBC mentioned that the matter was already functans official, that the matter had already been settled and it was not in the place of IEBC to consider it afresh, by virtue that they are not mandated to be the one to verify, and they had relied upon what had been presented to them before. So kinda they made clear that the matter was settled. So I am looking at an IEBC that is a bit not comfortable with the litigation process going on the issue of timings. We only have around 33 days before the next general election. We don't have the luxury of time to entertain these disputes up to the tail end. I would think IEBC would be at a position of trying to ensure the matters are settled as soon as now, so that it does not interfere with the issue of preparation of the election. And as is always the case, it is always an issue about specific court directions. I can also pick out the issue of, I think, Mike Mbovi Sonko for his candidature to run as a governor in Mombasa. You remember that matter? There seemed to be a stay order, but the same needs to be settled quickly, because you can imagine 2 weeks to the election, a court gives a direction or an order compelling the IEBC to act in a particular way. That one affects their processes, because they have to go back to print the ballot papers that satisfy the court direction or court orders.
All right, I have to take a quick break here on Daybreak. When you come back, we're still talking about this issue. There's quite a lot going on here. 32 days, the polls at Trevor Mbidi at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. See you shortly. Oh, sorry, we apologize for that slight technical hitch there. We're just back in time for Daybreak. Let's continue that conversation. We're talking about the issues around the threats and IEBC, but also we have a bit of feedback now. Let's bring that up and see what you're saying before we continue with this conversation. There's quite a number going on in terms of which way IEBC, they're supposed to be giving us a press briefing at 12 p.m. Bob Otieno says, interesting times indeed. It is now the ODM party crying foul about IEBC Kenya collaboration with K.kwanza. Who is fooling who? Okay. Let's see what else you're saying here. Engineer Lazaro says, Chebukati-led team shouldn't run this commission like a private enterprise where they serve the interests of new individuals. Wetangula should explain himself. When did he become IEBC procurement officer? Okay. Olum Justice says, Kenyan elections are very expensive, yet some politicians don't take it seriously. This expensive process cannot just be a formality. It is sickening to see politicians taking sides to defend or attack IEBC. It is ridiculous. Okay. Murugi, what do you make of this conversation around the accusations around Wetangula? He has said that he wasn't there. He's not met those people. He has no aid with the name that is being accused to have met the Lycos guys. But what kind of impression does this give? Just 32 days to the elections? Or is this just the usual politics?
You know, at this point, it's very difficult to differentiate between politics and the truth. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is this contract for the printing of ballot papers has had issues since last year. If you look at it, the moment it was awarded to Inform, this Greek company, the Public Procurement Review Board did revoke that award and required the IEBC to go back to evaluation of the financial evaluation of that tender. However, the people who won the tender, that Greek company, moved to the High Court and obtained orders quashing the decision of the Public Procurement Review Board. But something that was surprising is that of all the 14 companies that had tendered, it was only one company that had ticked all the boxes. Never before have you ever seen such a tender. At times you'd say that it is a tender that is tailored towards a specific company. It is a company that ticks all the boxes. So you have other companies, even before the evaluation is done, they have already been technically knocked out. So it raises doubts as to that award. But going back to the issue, and the letter, because I've not seen the letter that was written by Suna MP, Junet Mohammed, with all those allegations. But if indeed there is any connection between the individuals whom are alleged to have been invited to the country by Honorable Moses Wetangula and the company that is involved in the printing of ballot papers, then that is something that we should be very worried about as a country. Yeah. And at the same time, we should ask ourselves whether there was any collusion between that company for the award of that, or whether there were any brokers and middlemen, politicians in Kenya, for the award of that tender, and whether they still wield any influence on that company, which is going to affect the nature of the printing of the ballot papers. That's another question we should ask ourselves. And then we should also ask ourselves, how safe are ballot papers? Will they print? We've been told they're supposed to print how many? 200? Is it 20 million ballot? I don't recall the exact number. Yeah. But we should ask ourselves, are there chances that they are going to print extra ballot papers with the same security features that the IEBC requires that are going to be used for ballot stuffing? So that should be a question that should worry us. And at the same time, I think IEBC should come clear on the security measures that they've put in place to ensure that this Greek company not only delivers, but also delivers credibly, that there is no interference on the part of that Greek company. Okay. Yes.
Kipto, are you concerned when you hear such allegations at this time? Because it could go either way. Now it is on your side of the divide, but there's also accusations on the counter-accusations on this.
Okay, I can say I'm concerned, but I read more politics than anything else, because I was trying to follow the story. I was trying to draw the link, because what was the coincidence that the Azimio candidate, Honorable Raila Odinga, raised the issue about manual register. We cannot do election unless there's such. Number two, this matter of Wetangula coming in quick succession. I honestly think it's more politics. I don't think Wetangula has the ability to single-handedly dictate that a supplier, credible supplier who was picked through a public procurement process by IEBC. I'm trying to draw the link where Wetangula has control or influence of IEBC. I can't be able to see unless the people raising the allegation can be able to share much, because I am not convinced per se that an individual in the name of Moses Wetangula, who is just a mere senator, can, as per the allegations, be the one to determine and dictate printing of ballot papers. You can talk about contact, you can talk about people knowing each other, but not at this point speak confidently and say that he is in collusion. I don't think that one can be able. It can't sell. It can't sell. It doesn't make sense per se. Okay. But they have a right to raise an issue. I am a believer of free speech. I don't think we can be able to gag them to raise such issues. And the reason why it is important to raise any issue that a coalition or a team feels that needs to be addressed, it is good to raise them this early, so that as we approach the election, we wouldn't want any excuses. We wouldn't want a case whereby people would be saying an election was stolen. It is better we raise these matters at this point. Yeah. We don't have to wait until after the election and the outcome is clear. That's when we run around and make noise and possibly even proceed to the Supreme Court and raise such allegations. I'm happy we are prosecuting such issues this early. Yeah. As we campaign, all these allegations have to be put on the table. I keep saying, let our liaison team be active, both, for example, from the divide of coalition I belong in K.kwanza through Professor Kithure Kindiki. We'll be able to address that. I'm happy that our team will be doing a presser, and such are the issues that they'll be able to speak up. But from where I sit, it is purely a case of politics. We are in the final leg of campaigns. Everything that can stick to the wall will be thrown. And I'm happy the public has always been aware how politics are done, and raising allegations and basically to gain attention happens. I would only ask, let's keep focus on the process. Yeah. As long as IEBC remains competent, as long as IEBC gives room to listen to both coalitions and be able to answer to the queries and concerns adequately and openly, and let the media be at the center of this conversation, so that as at the time we are approaching the election, no stone has been left unturned. Okay. But I'm confident that I don't think Senator Wetangula has the ability or the influence to be able to even attempt to even to imagine to do what Murigi Kamande has talked about printing extra ballot papers. I don't think that is possible. Okay.
We are calling this state of the race because there are many issues that are coming up, so we're touching on the various ones. I'm sure we will not even finish all of them. Another issue that's still coming up is the IEBC candidate nightmare. Now Reuben Kigame is demanding to be cleared to run for president. This is after the ruling that we had just touched on about a few minutes ago. Is it practical now for any of these candidates to be cleared to run? 32 days to the election. Many people have already been doing campaigns. Is it practical for them to be cleared now?
On whether it's practical, it's still practical. And the reason why it's practical is because the ballot papers have not been printed. There was an order, I remember, that was issued a few days ago by Justice Mrima on the grounds that since the ballot papers had not been printed, then there were grounds for issuing the said orders. So I think at this point, if, for example, they are cleared by the court, and the court says orders the IEBC to include them on the ballot papers, I think there would be no hindrance in including them in the ballot paper. But now the question that arises is, say, for example, IEBC has started printing the ballot papers. So it will be a logistical nightmare, and not just logistical nightmare, it would also incur more costs in terms of you have to reprint the ballot papers. So I think at this point, it would pose a challenge. It would still be a challenge if they are cleared, and since they have to, there is certain information that they have to provide, including their photographs, the photographs of their running mates. We saw that the court said that IEBC must include the photos of the running mates, and so I think also the design of those ballot papers, because one of the things is the moment that you are cleared, all the candidates have to sign on the sample of the ballot, on how the ballot papers, how the names are going to appear and all that. I think now they'll have to go back to the point at which they were being cleared for purposes of ensuring that all presidential candidates have confirmed that indeed the ballot paper with which they are presented, or the draft ballot paper which they are presented, is correct, and the names and the particulars should appear the way they appear.
Yeah, yes. But Kipto, legally speaking, aren't these grounds for someone to also still contest the election results if this stays the way it is, by saying that these election results are null and void because there are people who are not included, the likes of Ruben Kigame, who now says he should be cleared to run for president?
I don't think it can be a sufficient ground to nullify the election, because when it comes to nullification, there's a totality of the entire process. This may be more or less like a blip, but not sufficient enough to nullify. However, I agree with the commander that there's still time, inconveniencing as such, but there's still a bit of time, and that's why my proposition would be, if the same can be concluded as soon as not more than the next 3-4 days, so that IEBC can be given time to be able to adjust. But it is inconveniencing. We have a very, very small time to be able to have everything in place, and I think they need to be a watermark. The expectation was 30 days to the election. We are not talking about ballot papers. We're not talking about Kim's kit and all that. All those ones should have been done. I remember when IEBC was doing a dry run of their respective electronic register and all that, as at that time it was expected that we have already settled on issue of ballot papers and the candidates and what have you. But with the 2 court rulings that have come in quick succession, the one for running mates and this one allowing the candidates to be able to be cleared on the basis of not insisting too much on ID copies and signatures per county, I would think the time is very limited. It is possible, but the time is extremely limited. However, even if, for example, compliance may not be 100%, it cannot be the only basis for nullification of the election. In nullification, the threshold, I think, set by Justice Maraga is a bit clearer, and I don't think if 1 or 2 people are denied on a matter or an issue that IEBC felt was right, may not be sufficient ground to nullify. However, what is important is what the court rules. The moment there's a specific court direction or a court order, IEBC has no choice but to comply. The only issue is, I'm sure IEBC is sufficiently represented in those matters in court, and their lawyers have ability to raise to the court that the time is running out, so that whatever orders the court give must be orders that are implementable within the time frame. What is important is that courts are equally good when giving orders. They never act in vain. They never give directions just for the sake of giving direction. They are mindful of time, they are mindful of possibilities, and there's no court of law that would want to give an order or a direction that knows that it is, with all due respect, impossible to implement. Let me give an example. You can't find a court giving an order that a candidate be added to the ballot 3 days to the election. That will be an impossibility. That one will be declared to have been overridden by events. But as we speak at this point, with the 33 days remaining, we have a very small window, and I think IEBC will be able to raise the same in court. And as at the time the court will be giving direction, the consideration will be what is practical, what is possible within this limited time.
All right, let me take a quick break here on Daybreak. When we come back, to bring your feedback with us. We'll Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Daybreak. There's still a lot. Third Ways Alliance, Ekuro Court wants Chebukati to resign. We'll talk about that also in just a bit after all this has happened. And we'll also talk about your views coming up shortly.